Welcome to episode 103 of the Lowdown Radio Show presented by eBay Motors. I'm Neil Graham. This week, Michael Uhlarik joins me to talk about his companies, and that's called Motorcycle Global. They're hot off the press, 50-page long white paper on the state of motorcycle electrification. And it's important to note that this isn't an up with people whitewashing of the state of things. It's a data-driven report on the industry to the industry on the ups, and there are many, and the downs, and again, there are many, of the electric motorcycle business. It's a market that's everything you could imagine, huge growth in some areas and epic failures in others. And Michael gives me what I feel is the best answer as to why Harley-Davidson-owned Livewire, who predicted that by now they'd be selling 100,000 electric motorcycles a year, instead sold 653 last year. And whether you're an early adopter of technology or your last will and testament implores your offspring to bury your KLR alongside you, you'll find something of interest in this episode. But first, this message from eBay. The worst part about loving cars might just be buying them in all the parts. From Toyotas to Aston Martins, eBay has thousands of cars and the largest online selection of vehicle parts and accessories. eBay. Things people love. Michael, I read your 50-page report, white paper, as you call it, as professionals call it, about the state of the world's two-wheeler electrification market. And here's the thing that struck me more than anything. It's that the marketplace, meaning you and me and people who spend money, we've got it exactly right. We have figured out what electrical, at least at this juncture, we have figured out what works and what doesn't work, and we've put our money to what works. Would
Yeah.
you agree with that?
Yeah, markets are pretty rational, which is what any, sort of consumerist or, the person that that operates or participates in the market would say that. Markets tend to be quite rational. Consumers make decisions based on their wallets overwhelmingly, and that includes us. And obviously, and this is important to anyone listening, like this is an enthusiast podcast. This is a ADB Riders and Enthusiast magazine. When we are enthusiastic about something, we become irrational. But we're the exception. The vast majority of people in the world buy motorcycles as transportation. And when the requirement is transportation, low power motorcycles dominate the world. And 98% of motorcycles in the world have less than 14 horsepower, less than 10 kilowatts of available power. And if it's just a question of what makes the best commuter product, electric motorcycles win, and they keep winning. They're cheaper to run. They're cleaner. They're quieter. They're literally cleaner. Like you don't smell like gasoline. You don't get oil on your hands or your pant leg or whatever. Even if it only happens once in a while on a modern scooter. Ultimately, it's economics. It's just straightforward as that. And we don't see it a lot in the English-speaking world, but literally everywhere else in the world, the data is overwhelming. It's a tsunami of low power, low to medium power electric motorcycles.
So maybe you could take us through how you came. First of all, maybe outline the process of how you came to this data. So we know you're just not some electric guy who's trying to foist your views upon us. So maybe tell us how you came upon it, and then we'll get into what your research has revealed.
Sure. So as the founder and lead researcher at Motorcycle Global, we peddle in facts, not feelings. And the good news.
That sounds so cold of you. I need a hug.
I'll give you all the feelings you want.
Later
editorial
on.
in editorial format.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So
but,
back to the non-feeling part.
Back to the non-feeling part. So the good news is that in the world at large, again, the English-speaking world being the exception, oddly, most governments in the world report publicly and disclose publicly total motorcycle sales by manufacturer, by typology, by price. Look, authorities love recording information because this is how they can plan. You cannot plan the future unless you know the present and the past with some level of accuracy. Whatever you do in your life, whether you're a plumber or you're a market analyst or you're, a, a business owner, you need to have accurate data. So governments collate this information. Well, Motorcycle Global, what I do is I know where to find it. It's not like a secret, but you do have to have some language skills. Obviously, these days with AI tools, it's a little easier, although those tools tend to be very biased towards English speaking sources. But you go to a government source like in Indonesia or Vietnam or India or Japan, and there it is, thousands of pages of spreadsheets. So you can find this information. Now, for that's great for Europe, India, Latin America, Asia, basically the whole world, except the UK, Canada, the United States, and Australia, where you want information, you've got to get it by paying for it and getting some information. And we've discussed this in the past
Mhm.
from a trade organization. And what's really, really important, and this is highlighted in the report, there are two jurisdictions where data is unreliable, fundamentally, US and China. And I giggle because, um, they're the world's quote unquote superpowers and, they do many things very, very well. Um, China is unreliable because it is a highly centrally planned government. Statistics and reporting data from China is famously manipulated. Sometimes, not always. The thing is, you never know.
Mhm.
The government of China made it a stated national ambition as far back as 1995 to make electrified two-wheelers one of the key pillars of their economy. So, they did things that governments do, like make subsidies, put their finger on the scales of commerce to, you know, promote one and disincentivize others. But it's 30 years later, and China is absolutely the world leader in motorcycle production and battery production, gasoline and electric. And you think, well, why would they hide their data? Maybe they don't, but China is in a very in a consolidation phase where there are literally 1,000 brands selling electric motorcycles and mopeds and scooters, and even the Chinese government is like, okay, this is unsustainable. So they're deliberately forcing a consolidation. And like the biggest Chinese motorcycle brand, the Lonsin Group, which owns brands that people here talk about, like Hove and others, were forced to merge with Zhongshan. Forced in air quotes, but this was not a business merger that would make sense. They were basically competitors in a lot of ways. But they were put together because China's like, okay, we need 4 or 5 giant players the way the Japanese have. So in conclusion, Chinese market data, it's presented in the report. Take it as guidance, is what I say. A suggestion, a reflection, rather than a hard fact. And the other jurisdiction that's unreliable is the US, because you can only get data from the MIC, the Motorcycle Industry Council. But if you're not a member of the MIC, like Suron, then your vehicles aren't counted. They only account for member products. And it turns out that Suron makes the best-selling motorcycle in America and is by far, has almost the largest market share. Who
Let
knew?
let me jump in here because that I found that really interesting because you would think that the Motorcycle Industry Council would have data available for the benefit of its partners, of the motorcycle industry in that country, meaning the US.
Yeah.
And I understand that the imperative to make money out of this, although in making money from it, and is the MIC owned by the OEMs? Or is it do you
I
know if it's a separate?
I can't answer that because I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's a non-for-profit trade group and that the OEMs pay
Right.
an annual fee, and that's what funds it. So I don't believe they own it. Not
So
literally, but if they get their income from their membership.
right. So my question is this, is it not just useless? Because if the Suron Super B or whatever it's called,
Light B.
Light B, light super B, no Hemi involved. If it is not giving the realistic data of the marketplace to people, then isn't it doing its members a disservice?
Well, I guess you could I would argue yes. That said, I don't know, ask them. Um,
Fair enough.
they're an organization that has never made a ton of sense to me. I don't understand the US government really provides automobile sales volume data. Like cars are fit in there. Why not motorcycles?
Right.
And the reason is, and this is also highlighted in the report, and I've discussed this many times and it needs to be repeated. Motorcycles live in the psyche of Canadians and Americans in the same space as a bicycle or skis. It is a hobby, a sport. And that's a incredibly sharp distinction versus the rest of the world, where motorcycles are transportation products no different than a car or a light truck or a bus. And they happen to have a recreational sport side to them. And because of that fundamental perception that motorcycles are a toy, the government, I think that's the reason why US federal government just doesn't report on this.
Right.
And, some motorcycles, and I understand the argument too. 50%, nearly 50% of American motorcycles, and if you include Suron, it's way more than that, are off road. They're not registered. They're not licensed. They're not insured. So at that point, the case can be made that, yeah, you're right. The majority of motorcycles in America are not for street use. Therefore, they are recreational, like an ATV or a side by side or a watercraft.
Right.
Although, ironically, watercraft do need to be registered.
So now that we know how you got your data, lots of snooping around and some very reliable and some quasi-reliable sources.
Bribes.
Bribes, butter tarts. What is it you've found? Maybe you can take us a sort of a quick go through, especially I guess the domination of China is the thing that really stuck out for me.
Sure. I mean, I think we should start with China and sort of highlight how, as I say in the conclusion, China is not only the largest producer of motorcycles, again, combustion and electric, they are the largest market for motorcycles, electric motorcycles. Um, but that said, they are also by far the key supplier of components, combustion and electric for motorcycles worldwide. I think most consumers have no idea how much China content there is in literally every bike they own or ride or have seen.
I certainly,
Uh,
I certainly didn't because anyway, you go on, but you will say that at one point if it stopped immediately, if for some reason there was no because of geopolitical reasons or whatever,
yeah,
there were no Chinese components, what would happen?
we saw this. I mean, we don't have to speculate. The world knows what will happen. When the COVID crisis hit, you know, we 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 saw what happened in two stages. Stage one was the West shutdown, and China kept going. There is no COVID, they said. And then, of course, they had all the COVID. They were number one in COVID.
You
And
know what? They're fine as long as they're number one.
that's it. And then they shut down.
It's the lower rankings that just piss them off.
Yeah, the CCP can't handle it. So the Chinese Communist Party, for those of you who wondered.
I'm a member.
Many forum readers believe that.
That's so true. Oh, my days
So
are numbered. Sorry, we're off topic.
that's okay. So look, when China shut down, COVID hits in what 21, I guess, or 2020, and and then in 21, 22, China shuts down, locks down hard. Um, you know, we in the West were emerging in stages and fits and starts, and people, as everybody knows, there was a glut of spending. People had been sitting at home, bored, they couldn't travel, and everyone was buying bicycles and hockey gear and motorcycles and ATVs and side by sides. It was a bonanza. 2022 was a sales bonanza, and there was no supply because COVID. Ports had been essentially idled, ships stopped sailing, all those things. Um, but we still had a trickle because China was still trying to force. Remember, China's economy is dependent on us. They're dependent on the West consuming things. They can't consume everything they produce. So they kept forcing product out there and, product with decreasing quality because suppliers were unavailable and such. When China shut down, we were starting to open up. And that's where auto factories, Ford, Volkswagen, Toyota, everybody, Ducati, BMW, like they couldn't complete vehicles because they were missing a rubber hose. They were missing a plastic housing. They were missing a thermostat. And this is what I mean by our vulnerability. Sure, you buy a Ducati and you say it's an Italian motorcycle. Is it? A great deal of their production, all of Triumph's production is in Thailand. And, the brakes, the calipers on those European motorcycles say Brembo, and they're made by Brembo in Asia. Who do you think is machining the brake piston? It's a supplier in China. So you get an aluminum part cast or forged or milled or a rubber tube or a small component that's made by a supplier in China. And it's collected and made into a subassembly. And that subassembly is then from China goes to Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia, where it's assembled into a component. And that component then, even if your vehicle was made in America or made in, Germany, that component contains high degree of China content. And there's no escaping it. 90%, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 100% of people watching and listening to this are doing so on a Chinese device.
Yeah.
So we know this is true. So what I highlight in the report is China is both the giant in the industry, the biggest producer of parts and complete vehicles, the biggest consumer of electric motorcycles, but unreliable in some way because, first of all, as I said, we don't really know that if the data is 100% for internal China. But the second point is Chinese supply covers a broad scale, and we've all had that experience. You can get a laptop computer for $300, and you can get one for 3,000, both made in China. And the good stuff is the best in the world. It just is. You know, the Chinese motorcycles, gas and electric, are amazing. The good ones, the crap ones, the ones you can get drop shipped from Amazon, are just as bad as they ever were. Um, and the key thing about, for people who are considering playing in China is, yes, you can make a lot of money by producing things in China. No one can produce the quality for the same price. No one, nowhere on earth. The battery cost delta, the change between the best cells made in China versus the best cells made in America or Europe, is about 40%. So it costs about 40% more to make something here with the same quality as it does to have it made in China. So that's our weakness. But you can't, even if it is the biggest market, we can't operate effectively there. If you have an amazing motorcycle and you think, hey, there's a big market in China for my product, you're not gonna succeed because the Chinese are closed. They don't want Western products. And if they do, it has to be through a joint venture where the Chinese partner owns a majority. So you effectively are the junior partner of your own production of your own product.
Right.
And then there's lately the strong nationalist pull. The Chinese don't want Western products; they want Chinese products. And the last thing I'll say about China is, and it's written in the report, the number one risk to this industry is I'll use not risk you getting delisted or demonetized by YouTube, a conflagration in the Straits of Taiwan. Even a little one that is just some heightened tensions that shuts down shipping containers, such like we see with oil presently in the Persian Gulf, would shut down the global motorcycle industry within 3 weeks.
The cars you'll find on eBay are just different. They come with a story that you can't wait to share. Maybe it's the car's history or the story of how you found it. Like this 1973 Dodge Charger on eBay. that had been tucked away in an Arizona barn for over 40 years, only 55,000 miles, and somehow in great running order. It even has a rare sunroof. Suddenly, a car that was hidden for decades is uncovered on eBay and ready to be delivered straight to your driveway, thanks to eBay's Secure Purchase, the new seamless and secure way to buy your next car. In just a few clicks, the title and DMV paperwork is all handled for you. There are thousands of cars like this on eBay, from rare finds like the Pontiac Grand Prix SJ to unique builds to your next daily driver. And now, a seamless way to buy them. eBay. Things people love. The Lowdown Show is presented by adbrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Let's talk about sales. And again, numbers, this is not opinions, but the electric vehicle sale, and I think we have a chart here, I believe, right there.
Yeah.
This would be a good time for that. So take us through electric vehicle sales as they progressed over the years.
Sure. So, I mean, what data shows is, I mean, it almost looks, I recognize that to many people looking at it almost looks fake, because it's just like a smooth ramp. On the bottom.
I just assumed it was fake.
Yeah. I drew a pretty picture. Um, so this is global electric motorcycle sales. And here's the important thing. What is a motorcycle? It is, powered two-wheeler that has a power output of more than 2 kilowatts or 3 horsepower. So these are not e-bicycles. These are not those scooterish looking things, step-through mopeds that you see that have pedals and that have a top speed of 25 or 40 kilometers an hour. Those are not included. This is things that are legally classified as a motorcycle that require a motorcycle license to operate. Whether they're step-through designs or traditional sit-on motorcycles, doesn't matter. And so what you see is that, combustion motorcycle sales are kind of growing, but gently. There's a big, lull during COVID, and then there's a recovery. But where the spike starts is around just before COVID, like 2017, 2018. Before that, you have electric motorcycles, electric scooters. They exist for about 10 years. And it's trivial. It's like fractions of a percent.
In terms of the overall market volume.
In terms of the overall market, and really only in China.
Right.
They're curiosities. That's when Zero comes out, Bramo, if those of you who remember these American startups like Bramo and Mission Motors, and, they come out and they promise all these things and nothing happens. Peugeot is the only, recognizable legacy company that comes out with a fairly mainstream electric moped step-through scooter in Europe, but they sell, 5,000-8,000 a year, which for a European OEM is pretty good. Mostly to the French Postal Service, like that. Then there's this jump. And the jump is because it coincides with electric cars. And this is highlighted in the report. The fundamental weak point of electric motorcycles obviously is the battery. They're physically large, they're heavy, and they're expensive. And they make up between 30 and 45% of the cost of a motorcycle. It's crazy.
Let me jump in there, because here's the question I had when I was reading your 50-page white paper. Is that how much?
I'll buy you a beer.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I've been jonesing for, even though it's 9:30 in the morning. Would you say the same thing about an internal combustion engine motorcycle? Would you say, oh my God, it's the that 4-cylinder R1 engine is 40% of the cost of the bike? Do we think of it that way, but why do we think of batteries as an overall cost in terms of the vehicle componentry? Do we think that way? Does this question make any sense?
Sure, no, it does. It's
okay.
It's the percentage of BOM, bill of materials, when you manufacture something.
Right.
And so the percentage of BOM of a battery is extraordinarily high. On a combustion platform, it'll be 20 to 25%.
Okay.
Even so it is obviously a major thing, but we've all seen this. So those who are really critical, and they should be, of sort of more high end, the kind of electric bikes that are seen in Western markets more, they'll say, well, gosh, it's so expensive, and these components are kind of not worthy of a bike at this price point. That's because you hit a price and then you're like, okay, I gotta manage this cost. So you start taking away spec on some things in order to hit a more favorable BOM price.
So in other words, you spent so much, you've blown so much money in the battery, you got to cheap out on brakes and everything else
Correct.
and other
Exactly
components.
right.
Right.
This is why a Can-Am Origin 15,000 US motorcycle has sliding piston, J-Juan discount brakes. That's crazy. But they had to make up for the cost.
Right.
So um, that jump you see there corresponds with the jump in electric automobiles. It's around the time of the Tesla Model 3. And just to complete the point,
Yeah.
what happens is the battery price, battery prices are measured at the pack level per kilowatt hour. It's just a unit of energy measurement. Dropped by 50% in 2 years because Tesla and Panasonic spun up the world's biggest battery plants and started making millions of battery cells, automotive grade lithium battery cells. And of course, in China, the same thing was happening. And so suddenly battery prices start dropping off a cliff
Mm.
in that 1 or 2 year span. That you see that little spike in the graphic.
Well,
And then,
for people who are listening on
yeah,
Spotify, we should or other online non-visual media. Um, I mean, we should actually sort of
walk it through.
walk it through just a little bit, because
Sure.
maybe just tell us what the graph starts at, approximately sales at what year, and then what it goes up to.
Okay, so we're looking at 10 years of motorcycle sales, combustion and electric, starting in 2014. And in 2014, the world purchased about 48 million motorcycles, combustion motorcycles. And the world purchased, a handful of 10,000s of electric bikes. And while 2014, 15, 16, 17, you see a steady 2-3% growth of combustion motorcycles hitting 45 to 50 million. The electric bikes are basically flat. For all intents and purposes, flat. Non-existent, not important.
Up to 2014 or so.
Until 2018.
I'm sorry, 2018.
And in 2018, combustion vehicles continue roughly on the same gradient, about 2% growth. Electric bikes jump 4 times, like 4x in 1 year. And that's because the Tesla Model 3 is introduced in volume production in 2017, a year previous. So pack level cost of battery drops by 50%, which means that now you have, as a manufacturer, have two choices. You have options now. You can lower your price by like 20-30% because the battery cost, which is almost half your vehicle price, is gone down. Or you can add more battery, therefore making it a more attractive proposition, has more range, more power for the same price. Or you can produce the same product for the same price and reap a huge profit margin. So yeah, 3 choices actually, all of which are wonderful. And it's reflected in the chart. And then from 18 to present day, from 2018 to 2025, it is a steady 13% compound annual growth rate. It's actually more than that because that 13%, it represents the dead years before that. So it's closer to 20%. And I mean, I don't care what industry you're working in. Whatever it is that the listener is doing. If someone told you that the business you're in will grow by 15 to 20% a year, you'd be popping champagne corks. And that growth occurs with traditional motorcycles and step through models. And also on this chart is a very slow and anemic growth of what we would consider premium or high powered electric motorcycles. So bikes with more than 14 horsepower. Think Zero, think Bramo, think Can-Am, think Energica, think Livewire. Now, the sales reflected on this chart do not represent those brands. This represents Chinese products that have 20 horsepower, 30 horsepower, and are marketed under hundreds of different brand names all over Southeast Asia. The Western models that people think of when they think electric bikes, the commenters will say, well, I don't see any around here. They're right. They don't. Because worldwide, all those brands I mentioned, the ones we think of here in the Western world, account for less than 5,000 vehicles a year. And that's in 2025. So the takeaway for listeners, The graph on the top is combustion motorcycles, and it's a wiggly line that more or less goes slightly upwards over 10 years, slightly. And the electric graph is flat, non-existent, and then it's a stair with steady upward steps. And, we're at 1.5 or yeah, we're almost 1.5 million vehicles in 2025. And we forecast conservatively in our bear case that to rise by between 35 and 40%. Best case scenario, it'll double. And the projection modeling is not based on hopes and dreams. It's based on complex bottom up analysis, taking into account things like what the price of oil will be. We see this every time oil goes up, electric vehicle sales spike,
Right.
and that's happening presently, and we expect it to continue happening through 2026.
Although, just to be totally above board, overall sales volumes are still, so roughly 1.5 million electric vehicles, um, compared to 52
Oh,
million,
correct.
internal combustion.
That's
Okay.
close to 60 million combustion, and we're at 1.5 million.
Right. It's
And
just
of course, no one's saying that this is a apples to apples comparison.
yes.
What's important here is if you are working in this industry, one of these businesses, the traditional combustion motorcycle business, is super competitive. Margins are 3 to 5%, and it's essentially flat.
Yes.
And it's highly volatile because it's exposed to oil price. The electric motorcycle business is high growth with increasing profit margin because battery prices keep going down by about 6 to 8% a year. So you can expect your battery powered motorcycle to either get 6 to 8% cheaper or 6 to 8% more range and power for free. Because as a manufacturer, you're not developing the battery, your battery suppliers are developing the battery. And in fact, really, it's the world auto industry that's developing the battery.
Right. Right.
And you just get to ride that rising tide.
Well, here's the part of the conversation that I'm most interested in, is because as much as low-powered Chinese commuter motorcycles set me on fire, and of course it is the luxury decadent products of the West that really fire my loins. And here was the after reading your 50-page white paper, here's what really struck me, which is, Livewire. Let's start with Livewire. Livewire sold 653 vehicles in 2025. Their predictions, um, when they started, were by this time they'd be selling, what's the number? I think I can't find. It was 100,000 vehicles.
Yeah.
So they missed it by, a little bit. So my thing is, I mean, these are not, it's easy for us to sit back and watch a football game and say, well, why didn't the quarterback hit that tight end? Or why, because we're all
Mhm.
experts. And,
Right.
we look at Harley-Davidson and think, oh, those idiots making those old. But of course, they're not idiots.
No.
They're smart people. They're capable. It may not be our jam. You as an enthusiast, whatever brand you loathe. Um, but every motorcycle company has smart people, and I know that in my days in the magazine biz, I met a lot of these guys, and they're like 26, and they're brilliant, and there's a lot of talent there. So my question is, what went wrong? How could they have gone into this? Obviously, they did their due diligence, I would assume. So what happened? How did Harley Davidson miss reaching 100,000 motorcycles by 99.5%.
Okay. So you're absolutely correct. I've met a lot of these people. These companies are smart and they have a lot of smart people in them. But as any one of us in our lives will know, you know, it, it takes more than, intelligence and certifications and qualifications to make good strategic decisions. How did Harley Davidson and Livewire fail so spectacularly? I've into separate documents and separate reports, I've commented on this. This is going into editorial now, so I don't have the facts because I'm not a shareholder of Harley Davidson or any other motorcycle company, and I have not been, privy to their internal documents. My analysis of their failure is this: they hire, and this is on record, they hire what they call big four consulting firms. Bain and Co., Kinsey, these kinds of, East Coast, really big business consultation companies, which are full of MBAs who had incredible academic performance at Harvard and Yale and teams of analysts. They're not specialists. They are doing vacuum cleaners for, General Electric 1 week, and then they're doing, a report about whatever, the restaurant business, and then a bunch of them get told, "Hey, we're working on Harley," and they go to Milwaukee and they have $2,000 dinner and, go away and come up with their documents. Their forecasts are built on algorithms, complex mathematical models, which assume which make assumptions. All projections, including Motorcycle Global's, have to make assumptions. What will be the inflation rate 3 years from now and the price of Brent crude oil? And what will be the tax climate in the jurisdiction XYZ? So what we're saying is they're guessing. Now, why is one guess accurate or more accurate and one less so? Harley-Davidson has to serve, its shareholders, who are really big, very powerful, and want to see a return. And they needed to borrow and raise a lot of money to make Livewire work. So the only way they could do it was to have fairly positive looking projections. And I'm not saying that they fluffed their numbers, but they were taking definitely a sunny view of the case. But here's what I think is the main error. They modeled, and this is again, I'm my best guess because I wasn't there. I believe they modeled their growth numbers based on the consumer sentiments around Tesla and around the meteoric rise of electric cars, even in America. And for those who think that's not true, I'm sorry, facts are not feelings. Electric car sales account for 15% of US new car sales. That's a lot because before Tesla, they accounted for 0%. So I believe they looked at Tesla and said, this is the new consumer sentiment. Young people are brand agnostic. True. Young people and most people look at electrification in cars as future forward technology. They loved, 10 years ago, they loved the idea of the touch screens and the app, connectivity, and everything. Also true. What they didn't understand was that motorcyclists, although the same person, an individual who might love a Tesla or electric car and be a person that loves tech and gizmos and iPads and everything else, might also be a really dyed-in-the-wool combustion motorcycle enthusiast who has 4 KTM two-stroke dirt bikes and loves wrenching. And the idea that someone was going to electrify their KTM horrified them. That's their mistake. They didn't see the motorcycle market the way, if I may say so, Motorcycle Global does, because we look at the way motorcycles the way motorcyclists do. And we flag and highlight those risk areas. Nobody ever asked for a Harley Davidson that doesn't go potato, 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 potato at idle. Nobody. A 4-cylinder Harley isn't going to fly. So an electric Harley isn't going to fly. And let's remember, Livewire was originally marketed as a Harley Davidson. That was the plan. They then spun it off and rebranded it as exclusively Livewire.
Right.
That's a damage control measure. So to answer your question, super, super smart people making strategic decisions based on assumptions that excluded the unique, wonderful, weird, passionate cocktail that is the motorcycle enthusiast. And that's what I think was their undoing.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I thought you were going to say something totally different. I thought you were going to say, and here's what I think is that, because back to the quarterback thing. Here's what I think. It was. I would have assumed you were going to say that it was battery technology because, for the kind of riding, and I certainly take your emotional aspect. It's a huge part of it, absolutely. But for the kind of riding that most of us like to do. Now, the key here is like to do. It may not be realistic of our riding, but
Exactly.
if I'm gonna go to the city and see my daughter, or do a big loop. It's maybe an 8 or 900 kilometer day. If I'm really, if the weather's nice and I'm in the mood and my back doesn't hurt. Um, and that's not something that's feasible with today's current
Correct.
battery require or what am I trying to say? Battery reality. So when they made the Livewire, when the Livewire was being developed, or when Harley was coming up with this brand, I would have thought that a huge red flag would have been, well, the technology isn't to the point um, where we can do this. And further to the point, I was looking yesterday at the Zero DSX, DSR/X, which is an electric adventure bike by Zero. As you point out, roughly equivalent in cost to a 1300 GS. But it said that at highway speed, the range is about 107 miles.
Hmm.
I mean, that's useless.
It is. And so let me respond to that, because you're absolutely correct, but there's a missing context there. And it
Okay.
comes back to that consultation piece. These companies, and allow me to promote my own business for a moment. These companies, they go and they try and buy market data. Today's conversation is about facts. You can go online right now and find, search electric motorcycle market report. There are dozens. And these are big consultancies and small consultancies that sell them. Sometimes these reports are 4,000 to 6,000 US dollars. I have over the years purchased many uh, through clients and etc. These reports are grossly inaccurate because, again, they are created by really nice people, good, smart people, but they are doing reports on every industry under the sun. They always include things like companies that were startups that never delivered a motorcycle are included as, key players, and they list specifications which are completely inaccurate, basic things. They confuse kilowatt and kilowatt hour. I mean, this is fundamentally bad reporting. If you are Zero or, Harley Davidson, and you go via a big consultancy who then buy via smaller consultancy, there are these data banks. You're going to have errors in the data. Garbage in, garbage out. That's one thing. But to your point about the range, it's always what I keep saying on when you interview me. It's product market fit. You're 100% correct. Battery technology in 2015, when Livewire was kicked off, that's 10 years ago, was nowhere near capable of providing a riding experience equivalent to a Harley 83 Sportster, which has a very small fuel tank, but as everyone knows, can be refilled in 5 minutes.
And besides, your ass is so sore from riding the damn thing that you need a break anyway.
So, you made that point, and it's true. This is again why consultants are, you have to be careful who you're asking. These are generalists, not specialists. So they look at the data, and the data says, well, the average American motorcycle rider, and they are not wrong. They interviewed Harley Davidson riders, Road King users. And while everyone who loves a touring bike says, I go 5 state ride, I go 15,000 miles a day, and, I tow a boat. The reality is when they get the real data, the odometer numbers from oil change services, the average American motorcyclist rides less than 2,200 miles a year. The average American motorcyclist uses their bike 7 to 9 times per year. The majority of American motorcycles spend their lives sitting in a garage on partially deflated tires. And that's fine. So that's truth data that got input into, I suspect, the Harley Davidson business case, saying, well, we know, hush, hush, look, we know these people aren't going far or often. So this is fine. Similar with the recharging story. Batteries being small or low capacity are not a problem. As I said, the Sportster, your Ducati, terrible fuel range. 200 kilometers, the light comes on. That's 150 miles for people in imperial units. Like, you're not going far, but you can refill the thing in 5 minutes.
Right.
Similarly with electric vehicles, you can recharge a small battery real fast. because electric motorcycles, even the quote unquote big ones, have small batteries, 10, 20 kilowatt hours. Energica has this solution. An Energica motorcycle, which is an Italian high performance electric motorcycle company, which went bankrupt last year and is actually announced that it was resurrected this week. They were the only ones to solve the entire high performance electric motorcycle equation. It was
How did they do that?
it's called engineering, and product market fit. They created a sport motorcycle with a real highway range of 200 kilometers. That's an hour and a half to 2 hours of riding for real world people on a highway at highway speeds in Europe, by which time you absolutely need to get off because it's a super sport. And it comes with DC fast charging, and it's liquid cooled battery and a liquid cooled inverter. And you pull up to a regular car electric charging station, which, despite what naysayers say, are ubiquitous. And in 15 minutes, because your battery's never at zero. It's at 15% or something. You go from 15 to 70% in 15 minutes. I don't know about you, but if I'm wearing leathers and I'm in a sport bike, I need 15 minutes to pee. 'Cause I gotta unzip the damn thing, take off my helmet. I mean, I'm probably revealing too much here, but, you know, it's reasonable. And their Xperia touring motorcycle had a real world range of over 300 kilometers. That's 3 hours of real world riding. You say, "No, no, it isn't." It is. Because, time yourself. You might be going 120 kph, whatever, 75 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour on the highway, but not all the time. And then, in the end, 3 hours on, 20 minutes off, 3 hours on, your day is done. You've had a great day out. And that's with luggage and a passenger. So
There is huge concern about, and I think justified to some reason, to some degree, which is about, where, especially if you don't own an electric vehicle, you don't know where the charging stations are.
sure,
And I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's considerably different in Europe than it is in more remote regions in North America.
I would argue it isn't. And I will, you know, yes, there is a no brainer situation with gasoline. You can find gasoline literally anywhere,
Right.
almost anywhere in the world, without planning. But it's not like this is difficult. I live in the middle of nowhere, as you know. A remote village in a remote province in Eastern Canada. I have 2 electric cars. I don't own a garage. They live outdoors in minus 10, 12, 15 degrees Celsius winters. The worst case scenario for electric vehicles. And I have never had a problem charging my electric cars, including my first EV, which has a very limited range. So, if I can do that with my limited range Eagle in eastern Nova Scotia, I'm pretty confident that this problem has been solved. And I know this because there's apps for this. They're freaking everywhere. Level 2 chargers are everywhere, and level 1 chargers, those for those of you who don't have an electric vehicle, are the fast ones. Sorry, level 3 are the fast ones, the DC fast chargers. Anyway, this is academic.
Right.
I'm not here to persuade anyone. I'm not trying to persuade anyone. The question around why did Zero, Livewire, and others fail is product market fit. The consumers of the world who buy high-end motorcycles, and I think this is most important point. Forget charging. The Livewire one is a lovely motorcycle to ride for a couple of hours. I've ridden one. It's it and the Sportster are the only Harley-Davidson products I wanna own. The Livewire one is lovely. It's fun, it's quick, it handles well, it's comfortable. I like the way it looks. Um, but product market fit is the tension that exists between what consumers in the market say they want
Right.
and what they actually will pay for. And I always go back to my business mentor of sorts, Lee Iacocca. It's just not that hard. Make products that people want at a price they're willing to pay and do so profitably. Get those 3 pieces together and you are going to be fine. So the Zero you mentioned, it's doesn't have fast charging. Why? What a basic fail. Number 1. Number 2, it's a marketed and presented as a premium adventure touring motorcycle. When exactly right, battery technology today does not make that easy. It's possible. The Energica Xperia set proves it is entirely possible at that price point. Parity, performance parity with a GS is possible. But you have to do some hard work, and it's expensive engineering. And you have to have experience building motorcycles, which Zero does not. And I would argue Harley-Davidson does not, as far as modern high technology motorcycles are concerned. So you have to either make the investment, or you just have to, they don't have to do that. Make motorcycles that match the market need. The market would love a $6,000-7,000 electric street bike today. And we know that the evidence is there. You can look at how much enthusiasm there was for the Sondor's Metacycle, a catastrophe on a business level. But they correctly identified a huge latent demand in America by Americans for a modest power, cool looking electric street motorcycle in that $5,000 to $7,000 price range. And we see with the explosive sales of Suron and Talaria, the signal isn't. This is always the thing that's frustrating for us in business. The signal isn't we want dirt bikes. That's the misconception. Oh, Surons are everywhere. Everyone wants dirt bikes. Some do. What most are saying is we want a motorcycle that's $5,000, that's easy to use. I don't need to learn how to change gears. I don't want to adjust, timing and think about oil changes. I just want to get on and go. And so easy to use, affordable, and fun. And, Suron developed that. And it's clear from the sales data, and these are facts, that it's the best selling motorcycle in America. That's an important and significant takeaway.
Just briefly, when you do your research into developing a new motorcycle, and I know you've done this before when you worked with Yamaha and other brands as a internal staffer, does adding electrification into it just make it more complicated? I don't know if I'm saying this clearly enough, but when you're doing an internal combustion engine, everybody knows the propulsion system. We're all kind of familiar with it. But when you're as Livewire and many other brands did, when you're coming up with what is really an extremely different propulsion system, is it hard to get, when you talk to guys like us, citizens of the world, is it hard to get information that's useful in an end market sense?
Yes. I mean, this is fundamentally why Motorcycle Global exists. When I was, I think it's safe to talk about this. It's been, it's been 15 years, since I was a staffer at Bombardier Recreational Products. BRP was doing motorcycle benchmarking in their product planning group. And I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here. Like, based on buying magazines at the Dépanneur in Montreal, like motorcycle magazines, and saying, well, this is the sport touring segment. And a bunch of guys who were casual motorcyclists who were in positions of authority were like, well, this is the landscape. And I mean, you should be flattered. They used the Cycle Canada buyer's guide issue, the one you hated to produce, as their benchmarking. And this is for Canada, a offshoot market of a market that was itself kind of insignificant, and didn't include a bunch of things. And then of course there was, in that case at BRP, there's always the French component. I don't mean French Canadian, I mean French from France, who were bringing the air quote European view, which meant the Parisian view, which again was incredibly single-sided and biased. And as a result, and this I think is still the case with their product planning unit, why, for example, Can-Am, their electric bike has been a broad failure. Terrible product market fit based on bad benchmarking. Um, Not because those people aren't clever and mean well and have resources, but because they don't recognize their own biases.
Right.
And so that's the answer. When you're doing this stuff, and this is why, this is ironic, why these companies like Harley-Davidson Motor, Incorporated went to a McKinsey and a Bain, because you go to those big four accounting firms and consulting firms to get the unbiased view. They're not inside. So they're going to give you that cold-blooded outside view. Great, except that motorcycles are not vacuum cleaners.
Right.
Motorcycles are not commodities. And people have incredibly complex, nuanced feelings. I'll go back. Allow me to, for a moment, to go back to your point about long range and live wire. You know, I am sure, based on the data I have seen, hard data about American motorcycle habits, how far they ride, how often. Obviously, these are averages, and there are people who do Iron Butt Challenge. There are people who ride, in the Minnesota winter, and everything else.
Andy Goldfine.
Sure. But the reality is that, you know, the Livewire motorcycle is more than enough motorcycle for the vast majority of American motorcyclists. If it cost 12 grand, it would have been I think a mild success. They would have been selling 10, 15,000 of these a year, which, to put that in context, is as many Ducati Monsters as Ducati sells worldwide. That would have been great.
Right.
Why does it not cost $12,000 to $15,000, or $10,000 to $12,000? Because Harley Davidson, again, product market fit, their company culture is, we have to have a 35% profit margin on this.
Right.
We have to position it, I'm in air quotes, as a premium product. It's a choice. It's not a requirement. Aluminum, a pound of aluminum costs the same everywhere in the world. The input costs that change are labor, tax, and energy. But you can plan against that. Business has solved these problems. You can hedge on energy. You can negotiate labor. You can amortize your costs in other ways. So ultimately, it's a choice. Zero and Can-Am, Bombardier, and Livewire, they deliberately thought, because this is what they've successfully done in side by sides and watercraft, and in the case of Zero, like their venture capital owners were like, this is how we do it in America. We position for premium, and that way we can do our IPO down the road and make tens of millions of dollars on the stock market with this product, by suggesting it's all storytelling. This is a luxury good. But the American motorcyclist doesn't want that. The American motorcyclist doesn't want a luxury motorcycle. They just want a motorcycle that's fun, that's cool, that doesn't break their bank account. And again, the market data shows that this is true, not merely in America, everywhere. The best selling motorcycles on earth are practical. They're fun, maybe. Some of them are stylish, but they're practical, and they meet their market in terms of affordability. Everyone's talking about affordability. And the frustrating thing, and I hope my clients and those who will read this, purchase and read this report, um, will take the takeaway from it will be, there's a lot of upside here, tremendous potential for profit and for expanding the pie, bring more people into motorcycling. Now, I'll go further. I'll say to the ADV rider community, you love your old Moto Guzzi or your KTM two-stroke or whatever it is you love riding. No one's saying it's this or that. It can be this and that. You would be amazed how many people I come across in my travels, in Europe in particular, who are hardcore Harley, Ducatisti, Guzzi fans, BMW GS enthusiasts, who also own an electric moped. And they love it.
Yeah.
The same way people used to love owning a Vespa, motorcyclists, because they're just fun. They're great for hopping on and going into town to get milk or an ice cream, or, it's easy on, easy off. Throw it on the back of the RV, have it at the campsite or the cottage. Let the kids rip around on it. And it's happening. But the major OEMs aren't in the West aren't recognizing that yet. Um, but the data is irrefutable. It's what people want.
Let's end with this. One of the brands that I think is doing extremely well, and a shout out to fellow Canadian Jack Morris. Is it Jack Morris? Who's now the head of design at Stark Future.
Yeah.
From Welland, Ontario, where there's a great short track, flat track races every June and July. So Welland County Motorcycle Club.ca is their web address. And this is how I get off topic. But Stark Future make electric, exclusively electric, at least at this juncture, off-road bikes, motocrossers.
Mm-hmm.
They're beautiful and they're extremely successful. And the company is seemingly doing very well. And as you noted, they just got $62 million from Royal Enfield. Did you note that, or did I find that somewhere else? Maybe
I noted it, but that number doesn't sound right. But right. Okay.
Anyway, they got a bunch of money from Enfield. So here is a company that to me has looked at electrification, seen where it is today, what it can do today, and not some speculative thing down the road where you can do 2,000 miles on a single charge. Yep. And they've turned it into a profitable business.
Yeah, product market fit, man. That's it. So it is 62 million. So 62 million from Royal Enfield. They grossed about 130 million in revenue. Limited profitability. This is key. Zero Motorcycles has been in business for 20 years. They've never made a penny. They just keep going back to their venture capital, firm asking for millions of dollars more. And I'm not here to bag on Zero. I'm saying it's hard to do this. Making vehicles is hard, period. Whether they're
maybe the name,
or not.
maybe the name Zero is zero profitability. Maybe they're just fulfilling their
on brand. Yes,
totally on brand.
Yeah,
no emissions, no profits.
That's you're right. Stark is showing the way, and it's really straightforward. The battery is the weakness in terms of cost, weight, chassis dynamics, and performance. So any new vehicle program has to start with the hardest. I mean, this is vehicle design 101. You start with the hardest constraint as the anchor point to the definition of the project. You don't start off by saying, here's the mission. We're going to do a 300-mile, sport motorcycle that's going to go 200 miles an hour. And then we're going to design for that. You can do that with combustion. You can't do that with a new technology. That's the difference between, if I can pick on it, a Damon motorcycle company, multiple failures, versus Stark Future, singular success. Is Stark recognized, okay, this is what battery technology is capable of presently. And then the next constraint, what are people willing to spend for this level of technology? And in what market segment are people willing to spend this? So they picked a niche, which was enduro and motocross. They correctly understood, and people say, well, Alta did this too. No, Alta didn't do anything. Alta delivered 770 motorcycles after 10 years and I don't know, I think like $70 million. Did they identify the right market? Yes, they did that. But Stark kept it simple. They didn't revolutionize anything. The chassis, the styling, it's all it's great. It's contemporary, but there's nothing revolutionary about any of that. They didn't focus on software and some dumb app, distracted by, promises of, an ecosystem. No. They made a motorcycle that was solid. And then they focused on keeping the price under control. Product market fit. They made a product people want at a price they're willing to pay profitably. And there's the evidence. And according to our calculations, they sold about 8,000 vehicles last year. May not seem like much. And in a market of 60 plus million motorcycles, it isn't. But MV Agusta, MV, the quote, most successful racing brand in Europe's history, blah, blah, blah. Modern MV has not turned a profit ever. Modern MV produces 2,000 to 3,000 motorcycles a year. Their peak year was 6,000 units. So Stark is 4-year-old company, 5-year-old company, has already beat them to profit, beat them on volume and on growth. So this is really a great place to end. I am, as anyone who's heard me speak before and read my work knows, that I am realist, but I'm also very upbeat. I think we're spoiled for choice. Never had so many great products and brands to choose from as motorcyclists, as enthusiasts, and as professionals working in this industry. And while I think Stark is going to reach some significant headwinds quite soon, they are going to discover, as Ducati did, Triumph, other small brands, that you get to that 20, 25,000 vehicle mark, Indian from Polaris and Victory. It's really hard to break out of that wall. To go from 20,000 to 50,000 is a monumental undertaking.
Right.
And it's not sexy stuff. It's not about design and technology. It's the grinding out of distribution, cost control, inventory control, mass market. Building 8,000 vehicles a year is not hard. It's hard, but it's not as hard as building 38,000 vehicles a year.
Right.
And serving, 5 continents or 4 continents. So I'm really excited by the Stark example. It's exactly where it's evidence that it can be done. And in Europe, in Spain, which I lived in Spain for 5 years. Let me just reassure those of you who are listening from the UK or from America or Canada, countries where it's easy to do business. Spain is not a country where it's easy to do business.
Right. And they're based in Spain, yes.
Yeah. So if they're doing it there with European labor costs, with European energy costs,
right,
and they're profitable, what's your excuse to the companies operating in the US and Canada? How come you can't do it? And the answer is, it's not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of capital. It's not for lack of, smart people. It's focus, precision planning based, strategic planning based on accurate, contextualized data. There, one more plug for Motorcycle Global. Anyone out there?
Michael, when you said, "What's my excuse?" I panicked. I thought you were talking to me directly. And I was starting to get my excuses together. I've got so many things to excuse myself for. Michael, this has been really great, and thank you so much for sharing this. I know this is something that you charge great amounts of money for your corporate clients, but you were generous enough to share it with us today. So thank you so much again.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. I always like talking about this subject.
This message comes from eBay. The worst part about loving cars might just be buying them and all the parts. From Toyotas to Aston Martins, eBay has thousands of cars and the largest online selection of vehicle parts and accessories. eBay. Things people love. The cars you'll find in eBay are just different. They come with a story that you can't wait to share. Like this 1973 Dodge Charger on eBay that had been tucked away in an Arizona barn for over 40 years. Only 55,000 miles. And somehow, in great running order, it even has a rare sunroof. Suddenly, a car that was hidden for decades is being delivered in just a few clicks with eBay's secure purchase. All the paperwork handled. There are thousands of cars on eBay, from unique finds, like the Pontiac Grand Prix SJ, to daily drivers, and now with a new way to buy them. eBay. Things people love. Thank you for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show.